Well, hello, ladies and gentlemen. Today we are going to talk about set intervals in JavaScript. Welcome to my channel. So what does a set interval in JavaScript do, right? The set interval function is basically telling that the program to run something or execute something repeatedly in a given time interval, right? So let me show you a really simple example. And remember, set interval is a function that lives in the global object, right? So in the client side, set interval is living inside the window object. On the Node.js side, the set interval function lives inside the node worker object. Okay, let me show you an example right here. Okay, so what we have here is a simple set interval function. Okay, remember set interval function lives inside the global object, so you can call it right away. Okay, and then the first parameter we're gonna pass into the set interval function is gonna be a callback function. This callback function will execute repeatedly. All right, and then the second parameter is gonna be the milliseconds or the time interval that you want to repeat this operation. So we'll say put in 1000 milliseconds as a second parameter, and 1000 milliseconds equal to 1 second. Okay, so from line 1 to line 3, basically what I'm saying that is I want this program to run, right? So I want to console log, this is my interval, repeatedly for every 1 second. Okay, let's execute this file. So right now I'm in the node environment. So I execute a file here. This is my interval. This is my interval. Yay! So every 1 second, the console log is logging that statement I put in. You see? And you can this execution is gonna be forever. And then you can just kill it with Control C in the console log. Okay? Clear? Okay, so that is the simple implementation of set interval function. So you ask, if this set interval function goes on forever, it's not gonna kill it until you press Control C. How are we gonna use it, right? There's also a function called clear interval that kind of kills the set interval function. One thing I want you guys to know before we go into the clear interval function is that the set interval function actually returns something. It returns a interval ID, right? And when you want a clear interval, right, this is the function we're going to clear. It takes an interval ID to clear the interval. So right now we have set interval, right? This returns the interval ID, so we can assign to a variable. Let's say I have a interval ID. So in line 1 here, what I'm doing is that I'm assigning this interval ID to my variable interval ID. Okay? By default, this interval will run, right? When you put it here, if we just declare a variable and then set the interval function, it will run automatically. So let's say we comment out this line, and then we run the file, right? It's running like we did before, except that now we're setting the interval ID to a variable. Okay, so after we assign the interval ID into our local variable interval ID, we can use it as a reference to the set interval function and all the process that come along with it. Okay, and we're going to use it to pass into our clear interval function as a parameter. So what the clear interval function is doing is to clear or stop any process for the targeted intervals. So in this case, our parameter we have here is a target interval here. It's an interval ID we pass in from here. So this clear interval will stop all the process is being set in here from line 1 to line 3. Okay? Let me show you an example. So I'm going to give you an example how to use the clear interval here in this file. Let's say I only want to console log this is my interval only 3 times, right? Remember this callback function here is going to run many times repeatedly for every 1 second forever. Okay, so I only want to run this 3 times. How do I do that? So let's say we have a counter. Initially it's going to be equal to 0, and then inside the callback function, and we will say if counter is bigger than 2, then we will clear the function, right? So we will say clear interval function, and then we will pass in our interval ID, which is the local variable interval ID. Okay? If the condition is false, when counter is not bigger than 2, we'll console log this. And then we will increase the counter by 1. Okay? So let's see how this works. We should print out 1 time, 2 times, 3 times, and bam, it should end the SetInterval function. So let me explain what's happening in here, right? So the counter is 0. This is the counter we get to keep track of how many times you run the callback function inside the SetInterval. Remember, this is the callback function we have, right? It's going to run every 1 second forever, right? Okay, so now we have to set the statement to for if statement. If the counter is bigger to 2, we'll clear the interval, right? We'll run the clear interval function with the parameter referencing to the interval ID itself. Okay, and if this counter is less than 2 or equal to 2, we would console log this. So this is the console log that we have originally, and then we will increase the counter by 1, right? So this function on the first time through, counter is equal to 0. So this statement here is false. So we will go to the else block, and then it will console log this. This is my interval in our console here. You see? And after that, the counter is going to increase by 1. Now counter is equal to 1. Now it will go back to the function again, right? Is 1 bigger than 2? It's false. Then we go to the else statement on the second time through, and we console log this, right, here, and then we increment the counter by 1 again. So now counter is equal to 2. Okay, and the third time through, the counter is equal to 2. Is it bigger than 2? No. Then we go to the else statement. We'll console log 1 more time. This is my interval. Now the counter is equal to 2, and we're going to increase by 1. Now counter is equal to 3. Okay? Now we go back up here on our 4th iteration. Is the counter 3 bigger than 2? So it's true. Then we just stop all the process for this interval, SetInterval function, right? So nothing is going to console out loud, and then we just exit the program. That's how we got only 3 console log in here. Okay, so let's go to another example using the HTML elements. So pretty much I have a website here, and then we have the start button and the stop button as a timer, right? So if I click start, it will say it just runs every 1 second, and it gives me the time of my current location. See? And then if I click stop, it will stop the timer at any given point. Okay? And I click start again, it will start counting again. Okay, so that's pretty much the SetInterval function running in the background. Okay, so let's look at the code. So let's look at our very simple HTML file here we have. It's pretty much the HTML file here. Our head has nothing in there. Our body has two buttons, right? One button that says start, one button says stop. And then we have a paragraph tag to keep track of the time text. Okay, right now it's empty. And then we'll include a script tag here to include our JavaScript here. Set time interval timer .js. Okay, it's in the same directory, right? I'll have a set interval timer here in the JS. And in here, we'll say let timer is we define we declare the timer here. Nothing is defined, right? So we have a variable, say timer. And then we have a function called timer starts. Okay, so timer starts function will start the timer and print out the timer line. And we can call it inside our first button in our first, the start button here, right? So we say the start button on click will run time starts. Okay. And then on our second button, the stop button, we'll clear interval and we pass in a interval ID, which is our timer, right? Remember, this timer is declared on kind of like the outside scope here, so we can have access to it, right? Now, remember the timer, it should be an interval ID that's passed back by the SetInterval function. And we can see that in our JavaScript file here. So inside our timer starts, we'll say, first of all, we declare that the timer text in our P here is equal to that element. We're gonna get element by ID, timer text, right? That's where we get the element from. And then our timer here, we're gonna define it with the SetInterval function, right? Remember, the timer is outside of the function, so the HTML can actually call it. And then we define the timer inside here, inside our function. And then we SetInterval function, right? The callback function is gonna run every 1 second. And then we declare another variable inside here, say time is equal to date. And the date function, we will return the current year, month, date, and time of your current system location. Okay? And then we will say timer text dot inner text is equal to timer, and then we pass in the time, right? So what's happening here? So I would say when we run this function, timer starts, we'll run this callback function indefinitely every 1 second. Okay, so the timer text inner text is gonna update every 1 second, as we can see back in our browser, right? So let's say starts. So this text is updating every 1 second, and it gives you the time back on the current time. Okay, when we press stop, it stops the timer, right? That's because we have the clear interval timer here when we click the stop button. Now remember, clear interval is available as our global function. So this function is available throughout the document. Okay? Yeah, so pretty much that's an example to how to use the SetInterval function and clearInterval inside a HTML. All right? And make sure you have the timer declared outside of the function so that the HTML has the access to the timer. And you can define it inside the function. Okay, let's recap of what we just learned in this video. So we learned that SetInterval function is a global own function, right? So in the client, the window object owns this function, so you can call it inside the window. On the Node.js side, the Node.js worker owns this function, so you can use it in the Node.js environment. The SetInterval function returns the interval ID as a reference, and you can assign it to a variable and use it later to the inside the clearInterval function. Okay, the SetInterval function has a callback function which will execute indefinitely with the time parameter we pass in. And what the clearInterval function is doing is to stop all the process in this SetInterval function. Okay, so I hope you guys learned something new today. Please subscribe to my channel if you. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video today. I'm gonna have another tutorial talking about using the SetInterval function inside some of the interview settings I've been through. It also involves some of the basic fundamental theories on JavaScript like variable hoisting and event looping. Okay, it's gonna be a very interesting topic. So guys, please subscribe to my channel to see more contents like this. Have a good one. See you next time.